My name's Peter McGillivray. I'm the Senior Research Fellow in the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership that is focusing on justice work with the Dharriwaa Elders Group. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the country that I'm joining from today, Bidjigal country in southeast Sydney. I pay my deep respects to Bidjigal elders, past and present. I also like to pay respects to the Dharriwaa Elders Group on Gamilaroi country and Walgett in far west New South Wales, and also show deep respect and gratitude to the work done every single day by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities all across this continent in what is an incredibly difficult time. It always is, but the last fortnight in particular has really challenged all of our resolve and all of our commitment. And I know that every single person who's joined this webinar this afternoon is with us in that struggle in solidarity. So thank you. I'm really excited to introduce our wonderful panelists this afternoon, colleagues who are incredibly committed to our work, as demonstrated in our work together in this really exciting project. I have Zoe Sands, who joins us from Walgett at the Dharriwaa Elders Group and who's a project officer in the Dharriwaa Elders Group dealing with fines team. The Dharriwaa Elders Group is an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation in Walgett and partner with UNSW in our Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership. We also have Lauren Stefano, Principal Solicitor in the Justice Projects Policy and Practice at the Aboriginal Legal Service, New South Wales ACT. The Aboriginal Legal Service is a statewide Aboriginal community-controlled organisation and a member of the New South Wales Coalition of Aboriginal Peak Organisations. We also have Dr. Rebecca Reeve, Senior Research Fellow as well in the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership, a key member of the Yuwaya Ngarra-li research and evaluation team, a data analyst and econometrician. So just a quick bit of housekeeping before we start. We may have time at the end of the webinar to answer some questions. We've got a lot that we want to talk about, but we could have time for some really good ones. So if you have any, please use the Q&A questions box that you'll see there in the panel at the below your screen. Also, if you have any issues in the audience, you can't use the function or something's happening, please email walgett.partnership@unsw.edu.au and Izzy will do their best to troubleshoot that for us. So to kick off, just to give some background to this work and where it came from, on the 5th of May 2022, the Dharriwaa Elders Group released a statement to the public detailing the harms caused by New South Wales Police in Walgett during their pandemic response between July 2022 and 2021. The statement was an important contribution to the public debate at the time about the efficacy of a police-led emergency response. And as Dharriwaa Elders Group Secretary, Virginia Robinson, explained at the time, there must be a better way to keep our communities safe from future pandemics than to elevate police powers. We ask the adults in New South Wales Parliament to apply themselves to planning better responses for the future. The rapid, widespread and intense use of fines by police to enforce public health orders during the COVID pandemic brought the issue of fines to the broader public's notice. Yet for many years, community legal centres and civil society organisations have been advocating to raise awareness of the over-reliance on fines by police and the courts and the disproportionate impact on disadvantaged groups and communities. It was the Dharriwaa Elders Group who added their voice to the network of advocates in building a systemic response to the fine burden caused by the police-led approach to public health order compliance, raising awareness of the disproportionate impact upon Aboriginal communities when such approaches are taken. In 2022, Yuwaya Ngarra-li established the Dealing with Fines project to support community members in Walgett resolve their fine debt permanently. The project is focused on increasing access to justice for Walgett Aboriginal community and diversion from the criminal justice system. In practice, this looks like early support provided to clients to access quality legal advice and culturally appropriate legal advice about what options are available to them to deal with their fine debt, flexible support provided to clients to prevent further criminalisation, ongoing outreach and assistance to gather documents and evidence for legal advice and action to appeal or prepare write-off applications for fines, and ongoing support provided to clients to link with and build relationships with community-controlled health and social services as part of their dealing with fines under a work and development order, a WDO. So we would also like to encourage everyone to have a look and a read of our briefing paper, which details the work of the Dealing with Fines project, which can be found on the Yuwaya Ngarra-li website under the Publications tab. And Izzy is going to put a link to that in the chat for us. And so in today's webinar, we're really excited to bring together some of the key collaborators in this work, each contributing fundamental elements to the model that we've developed as part of the Dealing with Fines team. So first we have the Walgett-based, community-based Dealing with Fines team at the Dharriwaa Elders Group, which is providing client outreach and supports to access services, both legal and social, and the WDO sponsorship and activities. There's the Aboriginal Legal Service and Dharriwaa Elders Group collaboration to do that work between shared clients, looking at the service design and review and monitoring of the services work. The work of the Aboriginal Legal Service in providing advice via referral from the Dealing with Fines team. That's the culturally appropriate legal advice and minor assistance. And then finally, the work of the Yuwaya Ngarra-li Research and Evaluation team as we look at the New South Wales revenue data and analysis, and also day-to-day support of the Dealing with Fines team. So that's enough for me because I really want to be able to share the screen with our wonderful panelists. So first, I was wondering if I could call upon Lauren to tell us a bit about this period of time that the Dealing with Fines team and the work and the collaboration really kicked off, and what was the Aboriginal Legal Service doing at the time in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think a lot of what we were doing at the time was a continuation, and excuse my voice, I've been doing a lot of talking this week, but what we were doing at the time that we first came together to talk about this project had been a continuation of what the ALS was doing in 2020 and 2021 through successive lockdowns and just an outrageous number of changes to public health orders and ministerial directions. So our work in the fines space originated with the COVID lockdowns. We actually, until this very week in 2023, didn't have a standalone civil practice at the ALS. So our work and our advocacy around COVID public health orders and COVID policing and our work in terms of fines assistance all started in our criminal law practice, and it still sits in this sort of space straddling civil and criminal law, which we can talk a bit more about later. But at the time I was working in our criminal law practice as a solicitor, and what we'd been seeing at the ALS, we've got as you said, a statewide practice. We've got about 26 offices across the state. We've got a pretty large footprint, and we were meeting clients every day in our crime practice through providing representation at court for criminal proceedings, who were telling us about these, the impacts of the COVID fines policing and the fines themselves economically on them, on their family members, on their communities. We were also seeing COVID public health order related charges coming up on people's charge sheets at court. So not people just getting a fine and us hearing about it, but actually defending or advising clients about how to deal with being charged for breaching the public health orders. So, we had been seeing this worrying trend of, if you're familiar with the term trifecta offences, basically another trifecta offence where, someone might be charged for some kind of low-level offending, but added to their charge sheet would be an offence for being away from home without a reasonable excuse, or not wearing a mask on a train, or whatever, any of the endless permutations of those orders led them to be charged with. So we had been doing a lot of work in our criminal law practice to meet a need for clients dealing with criminal charges. We'd been doing a lot of work to give our lawyers the tools to understand the best way to support clients charged and fined for breaching COVID public health orders, because those offences we never had them before. They were brand new to our practice, just like the public health orders, and the whole, the entire context that this played out in was new to all of us, government, police, our clients and communities, all of the organisations involved in the work that we've done together. And because of the high level of community concern and because of the impacts that we were seeing through our regular service delivery, our leadership at the ALS gave ALS solicitors the green light to appear in court-elected COVID fine matters at court, which ALS and legal aid generally cannot. We're not resourced to appear in court-elected fines matters. So that was really the beginning. And in 2022, by that stage, we had started running in a quite grassroots, ad hoc kind of way, a bit of fines assistance. In late 2021, we got a small grant from Aboriginal Affairs, which allowed us to staff up a COVID legal assistance clinic, which meant that rather than trying to assist clients with fines around court casework, we were able to have some solicitors who could dedicate part of their week to assisting clients with fines. And by the time the Dharriwaa Elders Group approached us about working together in this space, we had a statewide fines assistance service up and running, very small within existing resources, but something, you know, the context had allowed us to identify this need, and through working to refine those processes and get a bit more resourcing, we were able to expand our offering to include specifically fines assistance as part of our service offering.
Wonderful, thank you. Zoe, I'm going to throw to you now to describe some of the work that the Dharriwaa Elders Group was doing at the same time that the ALS, as Lauren's explained, was encountering these fines and seeing what that looked like across the state through the legal practice predominantly in the criminal law space. For the Dharriwaa Elders Group, what were the kinds of things that you were responding to at the time?
Yeah, so during the COVID restrictions, YN and DG, we set up a youth team to respond to the needs of children and young people, to advocate for young people so they wouldn't be disadvantaged, and making sure they were getting what they needed. Also making sure young people who were under juvenile justice were not being breached because their program and that the court ordered them to do was not running because of the lockdown, and supporting them with the extra stresses on families because of the lockdown restrictions. During this time also, DG did a lot of community education campaigning on Facebook, explaining how to wear a mask, and they were also getting information from health officials and police back into the community, so community were updated because the restrictions were changing all of the time.
Yep, so it was a time when there was lots of information. I remember you and I kind of looking at the changes to the public health orders, getting advice from the ALS through Lauren and that legal services, community legal services network, who were looking at these changes. And one of the things that we did together, Zoe and I, through the Walgett holistic working group and also through the youth team, was trying to get ahead of the response from police, and in particular around things like ID, how we could try and get forms of ID into the hands of community members to make sure that there weren't issues around where people were living, and particularly young people, as you described. So there was lots of work that was happening. And then, of course, the use of fines in Walgett when there were no cases of COVID in Walgett, and that being something that we saw really early. Beck, can I pass to you now just to kind of get a sense about what we knew from the data at this time, and how was that picture forming?
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so we were lucky enough that Redfern Legal Centre shared some data with us that they had obtained through a government information public access data request from Revenue New South Wales, and that was numbers of COVID fines issued by postcode and also the value of those fines. And that data showed us that in the Walgett postcode area, up to the end of, I think it was the 21st of October 2021, up to that date, there had been 168 COVID fines issued in Walgett, and the total value of those fines was over $148,000. And this is, you know, it's a community of around 2,000 to 2,500 people. That's a a huge amount of fines for such a small community.
Thank you. So I guess just to, I suppose, summarize that is that the pandemic and the use of police to enforce the public health orders in a community like Walgett, and this is a systemic issue with such a serious and intense police presence, really brought to the fore policing practices in the use of discretion and discrimination, which was really having a significant impact. And through some of the analysis of the data, which Beck will get you to talk about in a moment, revealed, a systemic issue which was exacerbated by COVID, but was always there, being the use of fines and the disproportionate impact of fines on Aboriginal people and communities. And so, in the work of dealing with COVID fines, we discovered this incredible need around dealing with long existing fine debt. So Beck, can we please, we've got some slides for the visual people in the audience, and also to aid in some of the numbers to be able to see exactly what we could find. So Beck, I'll pass over to you again.
For sure. So yeah, we've in the process of investigating the fines data, I reached out to Revenue New South Wales about data that we could access that was in the public space for fines more generally. And they kindly pointed me to their dashboards. So I've just, the first slide there is just to anyone who would like to look at those dashboards themselves. There are 3 dashboards. There's a link there that can be investigated by age group and by postcode area. And there are dashboards about the numbers of fines issued and the value of those fines, overdue fines, and work and development orders. And these have been really beneficial for our work, both before and after the Dealing with Fines team was established and their work commenced. So on the next slide, you can see some of the early work that we did prior to the Dealing with Fines team commencing their work. We queried the dashboards in August 2022, and we found at that time, as Pete said, it's not just COVID fines, it's fines more generally. There were almost 1,000 fines issued in the Walgett postcode area in the 21-22 financial year, totaling almost $500,000. And again, we're talking about a community that has around 2,000 people or so. So this is just outrageous. In that financial year, 177 of the fines that were issued out of the total of 1,000 were for COVID-19. Most fines that are overdue were more than 2 years old, which also just shows the economic impact of fines on the community. It's not easy to pay off a fine. We're talking about the context of, energy poverty. We've talked about the fact that people have to pay for water in Walgett if they can afford it because of those issues. So this is just yet another burden, a financial burden on the community. And prior to the DEG setting up their work and development order program, participation in WDOs had been falling, so we saw that as well. And around half of overdue fines in Walgett were being paid off through Centrelink deductions, again, just adding to that burden on the community. In the next slide, you can see, though, the impact since the Dealing with Fines team started working with Walgett community members, which happened in the second half of 2022. You can see how fine debt started to reduce thanks to participation in those programs or in that program. So the little table of data that you can see there shows you the financial year and the number of WDOs approved, WDO participants, the value of the fine debts that the WDOs were approved for and how much debt had been cleared. And you can see in 2022-23, participation in WDOs had increased compared to the last few years, and $57,000 worth of fine debt was cleared through the WDO scheme in Walgett. So yeah, it's really nice that we have access to data that can show us immediately the impact of the work of the Dealing with Fines team. Also on the next slide, you can see sort of the broader impact of that. So we still have, it's not trivial, we still have a fine burden in Walgett of over $1 million in overdue fines, but that has reduced by over $40,000 just in the 11 months that we, from when we first looked at the overdue fine data to the last time we looked at it in July this year. It's reduced by just over $40,000. There's a little bit of information in the dashboards that lets us break that down further. And we saw that overdue court fines, while the number of those fines had decreased, their value has actually gone up. So that's alerted us to an area that we can, the Dealing with Fines team can prioritise future efforts. But other overdue fines have decreased in number and in value. And thankfully, we're starting to see a reduction in the proportion of overdue fines that are being paid through Centrelink deductions. If you'd like to go to the next slide, Izzy. This just shows that despite all the good work that the Dealing with Fines team is doing, the amount of fines being issued and the value of those fines is still alarming. The left-hand side graph there shows data that was extracted from the fines dashboards on fines issued each financial year, and the right-hand graph is the value of those fines. This financial year that we've just finished, we saw over 1,000 fines issued in Walgett, although the value of those fines totals less than it did in the previous year. So this information is really helpful for us to work with the Dealing with Fines team to prioritise where activity needs to happen, but also to show the value of the work of the team.
Thanks so much, Beck. That's really useful, and is your final point about where the fines are being issued from and how we get ahead of that systemically and in our work that we do in partnership with community-controlled organisations. Triggers a question, I suppose, for Lauren, because this is exactly what we're talking about, is that in that nexus between the work of the ALS in criminal law practice and how we see fines being used by the courts. Can you talk a little bit about that, just to kind of give us some background in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about fines and fine debt, it's actually incredibly complex. There are, as Bex pointed out, there are lots of different sources of that fine debt, and we have, this entire penalty notice system, which is essentially administered by a state agency in Revenue New South Wales, but then we also have the criminal court process, which is generating heaps of fine debt, and generally fines are being issued by courts or imposed by courts as a sentencing outcome with a much higher value than most penalty notices issued by, say, police or local councils or transport officers carry, except for during COVID, when fines carried a very high dollar value. And, I think from a criminal lawyer's perspective, the penalty notice system itself, those police issued, transit officer issued, local council issued kind of fines, that is inextricable from criminal law anyway, even though it sits outside of that court process, because it's just a symptom of, what we know about the hyper-criminalisation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across the country, shifting towards this pre-court, outside of court process where it's under less scrutiny, people have less robust rights to be able to challenge or ask someone to prove that they committed an offence, and it dangles a carrot saying just pay it, it goes away, you don't have to go to court. And that's a double-edged sword for a lot of our clients. So that interplay can be really complex, and I could talk for the whole session about some of those layers, but one of those important intersections is exactly what Beck's just spoken about in looking at those trends and looking at the data. The penalty notices issued by different authorities, court fines, all accumulate, particularly with marginalised communities, particularly where there is over-policing, particularly where people might have, because of long histories of being over-policed and long histories of inadequate infrastructure and poor outcomes due to lack of investment in those communities, might have a lengthier criminal record and might find themselves before a court. And it all accumulates to further entrench, poverty and to further criminalise already over-criminalised groups. So, then the other dimension of that, where it can kind of come full circle, is where you might not have a court fine, or you might have a penalty notice that's issued, you don't pay it, you can't pay it, you don't know about it, you don't have the agency to navigate a complex process to do anything about it, your license gets suspended to try and force you to take some action on your fine. You don't know about that either, and then you drive unlicensed or you drive suspended, and that then leads to real criminalisation. So it is a bit of a feedback loop for many of the clients that, you know, we mutually assist between the ALS and the Dharriwaa Elders Group. Don't know if that answers your question, Pete. Was there more?
That's spot on. Thanks, Lauren, because it leads me directly in the conversation that I'd like us to have now about the needs of Aboriginal people and communities who find themselves having to deal with the extremes of this fine burden. And, you know, we have the benefit of hearing from the Dharriwaa Elders Group today about what those experiences are and what that looks like up close in the community and the impact of fine debt. So Zoe, you know, you're there working with the boys and the Dealing with Fines team. What are some of the needs that you're seeing that is, you know, that the team is supporting around the impact of fines?
Yeah, so we feel a high intensity of like police contact, long-standing alcohol dependency, clients needing a lot of support. They're feeling like isolated from services and avoiding interactions with government agencies, especially with fine and debt. And I guess also another big one is transport. It is a challenge a lot of our clients face and the Walgett Aboriginal community face. In Walgett, there is no public transport like for people to use, and petrol is a lot of money, and people just don't have that to get around, and so they're stuck and they can't get the support they need. Yeah.
So many of the supports that were offered from the Dealing with Fines team, and we'll talk a little bit about the model of collaboration and how the ALS and the DEG and YN works together to understand how to respond to those community needs. But the impact of the remoteness of Walgett being in the far west and what that has done historically and also now to really reduce the availability of legal advice from services that can really solve the problem, but B, those social supports that you describe, Zoe, and the need for the impact of things like homelessness, the lack of availability, as you said, of AOD services and supports that are appropriate, culturally appropriate, also disability needs, and also caring responsibilities of people with fines in Walgett, but also that there are so many people with fine debt that you only have to take into account the full breadth of a family's needs around childcare, being able to have the actual cost of avoiding fines. So as you said, the costs of registration and vehicles and all of that, which makes you know, the likelihood, together with the over-policing, it's a perfect storm for the fines to accumulate. And then, of course, add into that the court-issued fines as well. And so the work of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations to give voice to these concerns and who are seeing it up close in the work is so critical. And Dharriwaa Elders Group has been one of the key community organisations to raise the alarm on this stuff. So I just want to check, Lauren, was there anything else in terms of that statewide perspective around the needs of Aboriginal communities in New South Wales and community-led responses, which is what we're talking about?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is one of the, if not the most special thing about this project, is that it is community-led. It's completely place-based. It's about finding ways to achieve flexible service delivery to clients in regional and remote areas who may not have the access to legal advice or assistance or to those social services and other, supports to meet unmet needs that we're talking about. And it's exciting to me from that perspective, because this is, the way the ALS and the Dharriwaa Elders Group work, the Dealing with Fines team work together, is it's an example of what ACCO to ACCO capacity building and collaboration can look like without some of the challenges that come from working within frameworks which are tied to, specific purpose government funding or, conditional resourcing. This is really about communities articulating what they need and ACCO supporting each other in, what should be a really strong community sector to be able to give voice to those aspirations and devise the solutions that are actually needed on the ground, from the ground up. So, in terms of the needs of clients from a statewide perspective, I mean, what Zoe's articulated is absolutely what played out in terms of COVID fines from our perspective. We've got legal systems, we've got fine review systems, administrative systems that don't accommodate the needs of marginalised groups or particularly vulnerable groups very well at all. And they're not designed to do that. They're designed to accommodate a huge volume of work. They're not designed to be responsive to people who fall outside, I suppose, the average or the middle of what society is meant to look like according to the way these policy settings are calibrated. So what we were seeing is with clients who were fined, who we were assisting through our statewide fine service, a lot of COVID fines in particular were being issued to people who might have been experiencing homelessness or were fleeing family or domestic violence, or who had significant mental health issues or cognitive impairment or other disability. And then the fines review system wasn't accommodating those circumstances particularly well, because it was overburdened by the huge volume of fines. So, I guess that just goes squarely to the importance of capacity building in the community sector to be able to do this important work, because communities are best placed to identify what those needs are and identify the best way forward for the people that are impacted.
Perfect. Thanks, Lauren, because that sets us up to talk about how the Dealing with Fines team emerged. And I want to just flag talking about the data and how we've used the data and sharing that data with the Dharriwaa Elders Group Dealing with Fines team to make visible the real impact of fine burden and fine debt burden in the work and how that's played out. So before we talk about how we set up the Dealing with Fines team, Zoe, do you remember when Beck first did the presentation of the Revenue New South Wales data to the Dealing with Fines team, and that moment when everybody could just see, wow, look at that number?
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Yeah, it was shocking, I guess, like to see how much one small community can have in fine debt. Yeah.
And I remember the boys, your colleagues, Jack and Bungie, for them to see that and to kind of be like, wow, that's here, and we can do something, can make a contribution to try and get that down and help get that out of people's lives. That really had an impact in it in terms of the potential to make real change. So thinking about the model of the Dealing with Fines team, we have the Dealing with Fines team in Walgett, which is Zoe, Bungie, and Jack. That's Jack Mays and Bungie Dennis. And then we have the Aboriginal Legal Service with Lauren and Lauren's colleagues being solicitors and paralegals. And then we have the Yuwaya Ngarra-li team. So Lauren, I might just throw to you to describe how that worked, starting off with the community legal education session that you did with the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might need to remind me of some of the detail of that, because it was a long time ago, but I recall, setting up a Teams CLE to talk to the Dharriwaa Elders Group, team about a little bit more about the fine system, a little bit about the data that had already been presented to you and what that indicated in terms of a needs perspective. what services might be needed in terms of giving those people access to legal advice about all of their options for dealing with fines. So I think there was definitely a bit of scene setting involved in that education session, in terms of here's what the fine system looks like, here are the moving parts, here are some bits that are actually quite complicated, we might need to have some more conversations about over time, but here's what all of those individuals that make up those statistics are up against in trying to find a resolution for their either new fines or for their very old fine debt, which we know is a big part of the equation.
Yeah, and that was at the point when we identified between the Dharriwaa Elders Group, the ALS, and Yuwaya Ngarra-li the need to say, hey, in this process, there is legal advice that needs to be given. This isn't just a matter of setting up a WDO. That scheme is there available in the appropriate cases for people to access and work off their fines, but there are also these other avenues of dealing with fines which are more appropriate. And that through the dialogues that we had as a group, just leaving the space to explore that, identify the opportunities to do some early work, particularly Bungie and Jack connecting with clients, finding out, doing that outreach work to work out where the fines were, whether people understood what they were. And we also had some yourself, or maybe I can't remember now, but some of your colleagues co-located in the Elders Group.
Yeah, that's right. In the early days of our fines service, we had one of my former colleagues, Shana Shaughnessy, who's moved on from the ALS, but we were able to co-locate her in Walgett for, I think it was a day a week or a day a fortnight, to be able to be there to provide some face-to-face advice. But also we, due to the distances involved, and even though we've got lots of offices in the West, everything's really far apart and our coverage is low compared with, say, a mainstream government service. So we were setting up phone clinics on those days where Sian couldn't go out there and be co-located, which was great because we had the interface on the ground with the DEG team, with Bunge and Jack, going out, finding clients, putting them on the phone wherever they were, and having a lawyer at the other end who was, you know, potentially in Burke that day, but was able to speak to people as they came into contact with the DEG team on the ground, give them that advice, give them the options, and then take some instructions about what they wanted to do. And if it was exercise some kind of legal avenue of review, or access to a write-off through an agreement that the ALS has with Revenue New South Wales as a legal services provider, we could then pick that up as minor assistance and do that work, or we could communicate back to the DEG team about, okay, this client, it's actually a good one for a WDO, and here's the sort of amount of debt we're talking about. You guys take this and do the problem solving and work out what activity, how they're going to engage. So that was the model at the time. And I think what we do now has been an extension of that model, even though we don't have a solicitor co-located there regularly in the same way. I think both teams have become really adept at working with each other, and we've got our weekly check-ins, which are sort of a case management checkpoint, which is super helpful because it lets us keep the DEG apprised of progress on the referrals that we've had, and it lets the DEG tell us, okay, these are the barriers. What else is on the table?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a good segue to drill down in the work and expertise in the Dharriwaa Elders Group and the Dealing with Fines team to do that work closely with clients in the community. So the Dealing with Fines team have those deep links into the community and the relationships to be offering that really sensitive social supports with a group of clients that have experienced over policing, lots of discriminatory and racist treatment in the past, have all of those social needs that we described, homelessness, mental health needs, disability needs, really serious financial stress. And so I want to ask Zoe now if you could tell us a little bit about the Dealing with Fines team and how the team works in the community, and in particular, the flexibility that's required.
Yeah, so Jack and Bunge are from Walgett and lived here their whole life, so they know the community very well, which makes such a difference. Like when we want to get in contact with clients, they know if they're out of town, or if they're going through things like sorry business. Yeah, so we just know when we can follow up with them or when we can't. And they provide a lot of support for our clients, like gathering documentation for partial or full write-offs of their fine, of the client's fines, with the help of ALS. They also provide the transport for clients to come to DEG to work off their fines.
And so the WDO, the work and development audit activities, the WDO activities, are the other key bit of what the Dharriwaa Elders Group does. And you know, just to mention some of the contributions to the Dharriwaa Elders Group setting up its WDO service, just to recognise the work of Jane Christian, an Aboriginal solicitor who worked with the Dharriwaa Elders Group in the early days of becoming a sponsored WDO provider. And then also through Jane's networks, the contributions of the WDO team at Legal Aid New South Wales, who helped the DEG go through what is quite a burdensome administrative process to set those systems up. And then, of course, the development of the WDO activities that Dharriwaa Elders Group offers, but also an important piece of the model is the relationship that DEG has with Walgett Aboriginal Medical Service, because they offer through their AOD counselling clinic and mental health clinic health-related activities which clients can access. So DEG is offering, you know, supports which haven't otherwise been available in Walgett. And we know that the WDO scheme exists with community organisations being required to kind of take on the administrative management of the WDO scheme, but organisations aren't resourced to do that. They certainly, and you know, just to shout out to Legal Aid and the work that they do with organisations, but to really make them effective and accessible, they need to be community led. And so the DEG's work in that space is really significant. And I think the briefing paper that we've written together is the beginning of being able to tell the story about how that's been so effective. And I think we'll see more of that, particularly as we start to talk about early intervention, which is the next horizon, I think, for this work. And so Beck, just to kind of, I guess you're seeing through the analysis of the data, the impact of the WDO activities. Is there anything that you wanted to just restate or remind people, now that we've talked a little bit about the model and how it works, about the impact of the Dealing with Fines team?
Yeah, well, just to what you were asking Zoe about when we first presented these data to the team, I mean, that was really nice, because on the one hand, yeah, it's shocking. It shows the huge burden of fine debt in Walgett. But at the same time, just seeing Jack and Bunji's excitement to see, oh, look, this correlates with what we're seeing of the number of people participating and how much debt we're helping people to reduce. So, and that's really lovely for me in all the work we do. Like, it's very easy as a data analyst to get lost in numbers and forget that we're talking about people and real lives. And so, I mean, that's just the beauty of all of the work we're all doing together, I think, is that interaction between the research and evaluation that I'm mostly involved in, but that constant feedback and conversation with the community. So that's really lovely. And it's great, you know, it's rare that we have data at the postcode level that's publicly available that is useful to us, that we can access quickly. So yeah, shout out to Revenue New South Wales for making these data publicly accessible as well.
Thanks, Beck. That's really important. And it does remind me to, as I was sending out emails to teams and people about this webinar, including Sam Lee at Redfern Legal Centre, and also our colleagues from the Faculty of Law and Justice, and the work that was done by the centre down there on the history of COVID fines and the phenomenon of capturing some of the Aboriginal legal services impressions in particular about why policing shouldn't be used as a tool to promote public health. All of this work that we do really does contribute, and it makes a difference in empowering communities where they're resourced to do so to lead some of the solutions. So I just want to reassure everybody that we do read and engage and share the important work that you're all doing, and use it in the work that Yuwaya Ngarra-li does with the Dharriwaa Elders Group. And so, yeah, that's really encouraging. And I think this bit of work really demonstrates that collegiality and combined effort. So I think, Zoe, I'm going to give you the last word before we check to see if there's any questions from the audience that are still with us. For you, what are some of your impressions or reflections of the Dealing with Fines team work, and in partnership with the Aboriginal Legal Service?
I think it's important that community leads these kind of programs, because we know what's going on in our community, and we know what's needed in our community. So yeah, I think that's one last thing.
That's very important, and perhaps the most important message of all. So
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So yeah, just throwing over to if there's any questions from our audience about our work and about our model of working. And perhaps while we're waiting for that, I could I'll just quickly check my notes here. If we were to talk a little bit about the work to come in terms of the understanding the fine system, potentially the expansion of the use of fines, particularly around drug-related charges and matters. I guess that's where we want this work to be useful to other organisations and community groups that are trying to head off the harms of fine debt. Lauren, can you talk a little bit about some of that from the ALS perspective?
I guess there's two bits to that in my mind. One important part of this conversation, which I think we need to do some more work together on, but also communities need to be empowered to do some more work on, is the role of policing in contributing to this fine debt. And you know, we had the COVID fines phenomenon as an example of a long-term issue that had been going on for a long time, fine debt accumulating, fines being used as a tool to try and exert some control over the way people conduct themselves in public places, for example, or to ensure compliance with road rules and things like that. And then we just had this magnifying glass shone on the incredible use of fines as that kind of tool by police, when all of a sudden the penalty notice amounts went up from maybe a few $100s at most to over $1,000 or $3,000 or sometimes $5,000 per ticket. So I think looking forward, I think it's important to always come back to when I first became aware of the Dharriwaa Elders Group's work in this space, which was that very impassioned, rightfully angry response to realizing how, heavily that community had been policed and how heavily that community had been fined. So I think definitely work to be done in working out how we can exert some influence over the way that policing practices contribute to this problem, because everything we do is downstream of a discretionary decision made by a police officer or a local council officer or a transport officer who's empowered to use fines as a tool, or a court potentially. But if we stick with the penalty notice system, I think that's going to be a big piece of trying to address this in a wholesale way, and looking at what are the alternatives and how can investment in those communities to meet their own needs before that point of police intervention actually reduce the need to use fines in this way, in the wholesale way they've been used in New South Wales.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission report that came out yesterday, which was a review of the police's own strategic direction around its work in the Aboriginal communities, claiming that its core business is in conflict with suggestions of working differently in Aboriginal communities and with Aboriginal communities. So I think that's really indicative of what we can expect. And I suppose that from a New South Wales government perspective, perhaps they're sitting on hands waiting for police to do something when they're saying, well, this is not going to necessarily change anytime soon, particularly around the use of discretion. And so the question of what does early intervention look like, and that experience of the bulk, we know now from the data analysis that Rebecca's doing about the bulk of the fine debt coming from courts and that being a structural problem, but then also the police discretion and the challenges in a community like Walgett where the over-policing is so severe and so serious that you cannot get any space from those police practices to actually give things a chance to be able to build different pathways away from that type of interaction. And so, in the Dealing with Fines team, we've been talking about the offering of particular types of social supports which can do some of that early intervention work, but a lot of it is driven by police. And so what can we do that isn't just continually redefining that problem, but finding some other levers to stop that?
And I think the data is a big part of that equation. It's a critical part of that equation. It's bound up in the priority reforms demanded under Closing the Gap. So irrespective of whether or not police feel they have a responsibility to implement Closing the Gap in New South Wales, the New South Wales government has committed to that. So the more work we can do to interrogate that data, demand access to data that we don't have, and use that to really clearly articulate where those points in the process are, where there needs to be intervention, I think the more communities will be empowered to be able to share in those decision-making processes and share in the power around deciding what happens in community at that level. So data's key.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think, the data that Beck showed us about what proportion is from courts, and if we are able to demonstrate very clearly that community-led solutions can deal with the component that's coming from police and elsewhere, and that this other bit of fine debt that's coming from the courts and needs to be dealt with by a whole of government solution or some type of structural reform, the more that we can get specific with that through the data, we can start to make some real impact. So it's really key. And I think one of the themes that I hoped that we'd be able to canvass really well in the webinar was exactly how we're using data. And I have to just explain for the audience that the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership has a set of protocols, in particular how data is analysed and how we do that work in partnership with the Dharriwaa Elders Group. It's core to our principles of the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership, which you can read about and find more detail about on the Yuwaya Ngarra-li website. But Beck, I wonder just in a couple of minutes, not to put you on the spot, but I guess just to speak about the role of data in the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership with the Dharriwaa Elders Group.
Absolutely. And it is just so important. And I've been on the team for about 3 years now. We started very gradually on purpose because it was, capacity building for myself in learning about the community and working with the elders and hearing their perspectives on what I'm seeing in numbers. So we've had very much a focus on children and young people in the early work as well, and that's continuing through a lot of our work. we have, as people would know if they've joined our previous webinar, a data linkage study that we're going to be developing, which we're also, we've been talking to Revenue New South Wales about obtaining data from them for that study as well. And that will help to pull together all of those holistic elements so that we can see the overall context and impact of what fines are doing, but in the context of all those other things that everybody's talked about on the call, be it health and mental health issues, family circumstances, caring responsibilities, so many things are interrelated, housing and so on. But always, very much informed. The DEG lead our work. Any research I do is because it's something that they have highlighted as an area that they would like some more information and evidence about, and we work together in a very community-led way. So I'm learning very, very much from them, and hope that the little bit of work that I'm doing in helping to access data is contributing to the work of the DEG.
Thanks so much, Beck. And to just do one final shout out that we do have a publication coming out imminently detailing, authored by Rebecca, our colleagues Ruth McCausland and Virginia Robinson from the Dharriwaa Elders Group, and myself, and that's going to be have some really important information in it about our data work, and in particular its relationship with Indigenous data sovereignty and governance, and the role of government in their responsibilities as data custodians. So with that, I would like to thank so much our panelists, Zoe, Lauren and Beck, and thank our audience for being with us this afternoon. I hope that you enjoyed the webinar, and as always, our webinars will go up on the Yuwaya Ngarra-li website so you can share with others that you think might be interested.